You won't believe how this story ends, but trust me, you'll want to hear every word. Some betrayals hit harder than you could ever imagine. And this? Well, this one started at a birthday party that wasn't even supposed to happen. I can't say I ever wanted a quiet life. It wasn't my style, and it definitely wasn't Laura's. Our life in Miami was like the city itself, vivid, unpredictable, and just a little too hot to handle. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. We've been married for over 15 years, and although we had our share of ups and downs, I believed we were in it for the long haul. No kids, never were, and while that's sometimes gnawed at the edges of our conversations late at night, we never dwelled on it. It's just us against the world, she'd say, and I'd believe her every time. Things started to feel off around the time she suggested throwing a party for our neighbor's daughter. Sarah, the kid from 2 doors down, was turning 9, and her parents were going through a messy divorce. Laura thought it would be a kind gesture, as she put it, to host the celebration. "They don't need another thing to fight over," she said one night, pouring a glass of wine in that practiced way of hers. "Besides, it's not like we have much else going on." I shrugged, not particularly invested but not opposed. If it made her happy, why not? The day of the party, our house was transformed into a pastel explosion of balloons, streamers, and a bounce house that seemed far too big for our yard. Laura was in her element, effortlessly charming the kids and chatting up the parents. I, on the other hand, stuck to grilling hot dogs and trying not to get dragged into any conversations about school districts or after-school soccer leagues. Then he arrived. I didn't catch his name at first, but it didn't take long to notice him. Tall, lean, the kind of guy who looked like he'd just walked off a yacht, because he probably had. He strode into the party like he owned the place, a confident smile plastered across his face. Laura's eyes lit up when she saw him, and for a moment, I thought I saw something else there too. Excitement? Relief? Whatever it was enough to send a faint chill down my spine. She introduced him to me as Mark, a colleague from her office. "He's the one who helped me land that investor last month," she said, her hand lingering on his arm just a second too long. I shook his hand, the kind of firm grip that men like us used to size each other up. "Nice to meet you," I said, keeping my voice even. He smiled that perfect, polished smile, and I instantly disliked him. As the party went on, I couldn't help but notice how often they found reasons to talk. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else to notice, but I'd been married to Laura long enough to read between the lines. The way she laughed at his jokes, leaned in just a bit closer than necessary. It wasn't jealousy, not yet, but something about it didn't sit right with me. That night, after the party ended and we were cleaning up, I asked her about him. "Mark seems friendly," I said, keeping my tone light. She barely looked up from the pile of plates she was stacking. "He's a good guy," she said simply, brushing it off. And that was the end of it, or so I thought. Over the next few weeks, Mark's name started coming up more often than I was comfortable with. He was always helping with something, a project at work, a late-night call about a deal that needed closing. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself I was being paranoid. Laura had always been driven, and her career had taken off in ways neither of us had expected. If Mark was part of that success, who was I to stand in the way? But then came the little things. The nights she came home just a bit later than usual. The sudden influx of text messages she'd smile at before quickly locking her phone. One night, I noticed her phone buzzing on the counter and glanced at the screen. A name I didn't recognize. A message that read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I started paying closer attention. Patterns began to emerge. Late meetings on Tuesdays, canceled plans on Thursdays. It wasn't enough to accuse her of anything, but it was enough to keep me up at night, staring at the ceiling and replaying every interaction between her and Mark in my mind. Then came the night that changed everything. Laura had a work event and didn't get home until after midnight. She was buzzed, her cheeks flushed and her smile a little too wide. I asked how the event went, and she launched into a rehearsed-sounding description of boring speeches and networking conversations. I nodded along, but something about the way she avoided my eyes set my nerves on edge. When she went to bed, I stayed up, nursing a glass of bourbon and letting my suspicions fester. It was the kind of night where Miami felt too quiet, the hum of the city drowned out by the storm brewing in my chest. I decided to do something I'd never done before. I checked her phone. It was risky, but she'd left it on the kitchen counter, and the nagging voice in my head wouldn't let me rest until I knew. Her messages were clean, almost too clean, like she'd been careful to cover her tracks. But then I found a photo in her deleted folder. It was blurry, taken at a distance, but unmistakable. Laura and Mark, leaning in close, her hand on his chest, his lips inches from hers. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The photo was damning, but it wasn't definitive proof. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But deep down, I knew. The Laura I thought I knew wouldn't need to delete an innocent photo. And yet, I didn't confront her. Not then. Instead, I started to plan. If Laura had secrets, then so would I. And if there was one thing I was certain of, it was that revenge wouldn't be sweet. It would be calculated. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had changed. Laura was up early, bustling around the kitchen like she didn't have a care in the world. She hummed as she made coffee, her hair pulled into a loose bun. It was a familiar scene, one I'd watched 1,000 times before. But now, it felt different, tainted. I kissed her cheek before heading out for the day, the scent of her perfume lingering as I walked to my car. I didn't have a plan yet, not exactly, but I knew I needed answers. I couldn't confront her, not without more proof. And if she was lying to me, I wanted to catch her in a way that left no room for denial. My first move was simple. I called a private investigator. I'd never considered doing something like that before, but I figured if anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was someone who made a living digging up the truth. The guy I hired, Dominic, was exactly what I needed: discreet, efficient, and experienced. I gave him the basics: her schedule, Mark's name, and the days she claimed to be working late. He didn't ask questions, just promised to keep me updated. For the next week, I pretended everything was normal. Laura and I went out to dinner, watched Netflix, even talked about a vacation we'd been meaning to take. But beneath the surface, I was a mess. Every time her phone buzzed, every time she mentioned a late meeting, it felt like another crack in the foundation of our marriage. Then Dominic called. "You were right," he said, his voice flat. "She's seeing him. I've got photos, timestamps, everything." Hearing it out loud hit me like a punch to the gut. I asked for the details, even though part of me didn't want to know. He told me they'd met at a hotel, classy but discreet. The kind of place that catered to people who didn't want to be seen. He had photos of them walking in together, of her laughing as Mark held the door for her. "Do you want me to keep digging?" Dominic asked. "No," I said quickly. "That's enough." That night, I sat in my car outside our house, staring at the glowing windows. Laura was inside, probably reading or watching one of her cooking shows. I thought about storming in, throwing the evidence in her face, demanding answers. But that wasn't good enough. She'd lied to me, betrayed me, and I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. The next morning, I told her I had a work trip. It wasn't unusual. I'd had plenty of overnight trips before, but this time, I didn't actually leave. Instead, I checked into a hotel a few miles away and spent the day piecing together my plan. If she wanted a double life, I'd give her one. But I wouldn't just expose her. I'd dismantle the version of herself she'd worked so hard to create. Laura prided herself on her image. Polished, professional, untouchable. I was going to unravel it, piece by piece. First, I sent the photos Dominic had taken to Mark's wife. I'd done a bit of digging and found out he was married too. His wife, Claire, was a prominent socialite, the kind of woman who had her face splashed across charity gala photos and lifestyle blogs. I knew she wouldn't take the news lightly. Then, I started making anonymous donations in Laura's name to a few controversial causes. Nothing illegal, but enough to raise eyebrows if anyone looked too closely. I knew it was petty, but it felt good to have some small measure of control. Finally, I reached out to Sarah's mother, the neighbor whose daughter's birthday party had started this whole mess. I told her I'd overheard Laura talking about their divorce in a less-than-flattering way. It wasn't entirely true, but it planted a seed of doubt. I wanted Laura to feel the walls closing in on her, to sense that her carefully curated world wasn't as secure as she thought. But I didn't stop there. I started showing up at Laura's office unexpectedly, bringing her lunch or dropping by with coffee. I wanted her to feel the weight of my presence, to know I was watching. At first, she seemed unfazed, but over time, I noticed the way her smile tightened when she saw me, the way her eyes darted around like she was waiting for something to go wrong. Then came the day I'd been waiting for. Dominic called again, this time with new information. Laura and Mark had planned another rendezvous, this time at a swanky bar downtown. I decided it was time to make my move. I arrived at the bar early, slipping into a corner booth where I had a clear view of the entrance. Laura arrived first, looking radiant in a dress I'd never seen before. She scanned the room, her expression brightening when Mark walked in. They hugged, and I felt a sharp pang in my chest. I let them settle in, ordering drinks and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Then, I made my move. I walked over to their table, my heart pounding but my face calm. "Laura," I said, my voice low. "I thought you were at a meeting." Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Mark stiffened, his eyes darting between us. "Who's this?" I asked, feigning confusion. "A client?" Laura stammered something unintelligible, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I turned and walked out, leaving her to explain herself to Mark or not. I didn't care. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was the beginning of something new, something I controlled. The drive home felt surreal. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, yet my face remained calm. Inside, though, I was seething. The scene at the bar replayed in my head. Laura's panicked expression, Mark's wide-eyed silence. I wanted to laugh at how perfectly it had unfolded, but the pain beneath the surface kept bubbling up, threatening to drown me. When I walked into the house, Laura was already there, pacing in the living room. She must have left the bar as soon as I did. She spun around the second she heard the door open. "Chris," she started, her voice trembling. "I can explain." "Explain?" I set my keys down on the counter and looked at her. For a moment, I didn't say anything, just let the silence hang between us. "Sure, go ahead. I'm dying to hear it." She blinked rapidly, her hands fidgeting in front of her. "It's not what it looked like." I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "Oh, come on, Laura. Don't insult my intelligence. I saw you. I heard you. What do you think I'm going to believe? That Mark is just some friendly coworker?" Her face crumpled, and for a split second, I thought she might cry. But then she straightened up, a flash of defiance in her eyes. "You don't understand," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It wasn't. I mean, it's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my tone ice cold. "Let me simplify it for you. You're cheating on me." "That's not complicated, Laura. That's betrayal." Her jaw clenched, and she took a step toward me. "You have no idea what it's been like, Chris. You're so wrapped up in your own world. You never even noticed how lonely I've been." "Lonely?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You're lonely? Laura, I've been here. I've been here every damn day, trying to make this work. And instead of talking to me, you decided to run off with some guy from your office." "It's not like that," she yelled, her voice breaking. "Mark, he listens to me. He makes me feel alive. Something I haven't felt in years." Her words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I just stared at her, trying to process what she'd said. "So what?" I finally managed. "You were bored? Is that it? You were bored. So you decided to blow up our marriage?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. "You don't get it," she said softly. "I didn't plan for this to happen. I didn't want this." "But it happened," I interrupted, my voice hard. "And you let it. You made a choice, Laura. Over and over again. You chose him. Don't stand there and tell me you didn't want this." She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, cutting her off. "You know what? I don't care. I don't care why you did it. I just want to know one thing." "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Did you ever love me?" My voice cracked slightly, betraying the anger I was trying so hard to hold on to. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, she said, I did. I do. Chris, I love you. Stop, I snapped. Don't lie to me. Not now. You don't get to say that anymore. She reached out like she wanted to touch me, but I stepped back, and her hand fell to her side. Chris, please, she pleaded. We can fix this. I'll end it with Mark, I swear. We can go to counseling, start fresh. Just don't give up on us. Give up on us? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Laura, you gave up on us the second you walked into that hotel with him. You want to fix this? Fine. Start by packing your things. Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I watched her for a moment, a mixture of anger and heartbreak churning in my chest. Then I turned and walked upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind me. The next morning, Laura was gone when I came downstairs. I wasn't sure if she'd left for good or just needed some space, but I didn't care. I was done playing the victim, done letting her dictate the terms of our life. If she thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was wrong. I picked up my phone and called Dominic. It's time, I said simply. Time for what? He asked, though I could hear the curiosity in his voice. To put the rest of the plan into action. For the next few days, I was a man on a mission. I leaked the photos to a few key people at Laura's office. Nothing overt, just enough to spark whispers. I made sure Mark's wife got an anonymous tip about where he'd be on Thursday night. And when Sarah's mom called to thank Laura for helping with the party, I subtly suggested that Laura might have been more interested in the dad's presence than the kid's happiness. The pieces fell into place faster than I expected. By the end of the week, Laura's perfect little world was starting to unravel. And while I knew revenge wouldn't erase the pain she'd caused me, it felt good to see her squirm. The house was eerily quiet when Laura walked in that night. I was waiting in the living room, a half-empty glass of bourbon in my hand. The same photos Dominic had taken spread out on the coffee table. When she saw them, she froze, her keys dangling from her fingers. Well, I said, leaning back in my chair. You're late. Long day at work? Her eyes darted to mine, wide with panic. Chris, I can explain. Don't bother, I interrupted, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. I'm not interested in your explanations. I'm interested in the truth. So why don't you start with that? She hesitated, then slowly set her keys down on the counter. It's not what you think, she said, her voice trembling. Oh, really? I picked up one of the photos and held it up. Because it sure looks like you've been fooling around Mark in hotels while I've been here, playing the role of the clueless husband. Her face crumpled, but I pressed on, not giving her a chance to speak. Did you laugh about it? I asked, my voice rising. Did you and your boyfriend joke about how stupid I must be, sitting at home while you were off playing house with him? Stop, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't like that. Then tell me, I snapped, leaning forward. What was it like, Laura? Enlighten me. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, struggling to find the words. Finally, she said, I didn't mean for this to happen. You didn't mean for it to happen? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. That's your excuse? What did you think was going to happen when you started meeting him in secret? When you started lying to me? I felt alone, she said, her voice breaking. You've been so distant, Chris. It's like you stopped seeing me. Don't you dare blame this on me, I interrupted, my voice cold. Don't you dare try to make this my fault. I'm not, she said quickly. I didn't know how to tell you how I was feeling. And then Mark was there, and he listened, and you fell into his bed, I finished for her. How convenient. She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. You think he cares about you? I asked, my tone scathing. You think you're special to him? Because I guarantee you're not. Guys like Mark, they love the chase. But once the game is over, you're just another story for them to laugh about with their buddies. That's not true, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Isn't it? I leaned back in my chair, watching her carefully. Tell me something, Laura. When he's done with you, and trust me, he will be. What are you going to do then? Run back to me and expect me to pick up the pieces? She stared at me, her eyes full of desperation. Chris, I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. But we can fix this. Please, just give me a chance. A chance? I repeated, my voice full of disbelief. You're asking me for a chance after everything you've done? I love you, she said, her voice breaking. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I love you, and I don't want to lose us. You love me, I said slowly, tasting the words. Funny, because when I think about love, I don't think about sneaking around behind someone's back. I don't think about lies and betrayal. Chris. No, I interrupted, standing up and looking down at her. You don't get to say you love me. Not anymore. You gave that up the second you decided to kiss him. Her tears fell harder now, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. You can stay here tonight, I said, my voice flat. But tomorrow, I want you gone. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, her voice trembling. Frankly, I don't care, I said coldly. Go to Mark. See if he's as eager to take you in as he was to take you to bed. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't look back. Instead, I walked upstairs, leaving her standing alone in the living room. The moment I closed the bedroom door, I leaned against it, my chest heaving. The anger, the pain. It all felt overwhelming, suffocating. But I knew one thing for sure. Laura had made her choice and now it was my turn. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Laura sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and blotchy from crying. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and puffy. I stayed up all night thinking, she began, her voice hoarse. Chris, I'm sorry. I don't even know how to start making this right. But please, let's talk. I grabbed a mug from the cabinet and poured myself some coffee, deliberately taking my time before responding. Talk? I finally said, turning to face her. You want to talk now? After months of lies and sneaking around? Forgive me if I don't feel like chatting over coffee. She flinched at my tone, but she didn't back down. I'm not leaving, Chris. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I'm not giving up on us. I laughed, the sound hollow. Giving up? Laura, you already gave up. You gave up the minute you decided he was worth more to you than I was. That's not true, she protested, standing up. I never stopped loving you. Stop, I said sharply, holding up a hand. Just stop. Do you even hear yourself? You don't get to rewrite what happened to make yourself feel better. You made your choice, Laura. You picked him. Her lip quivered, and for a moment, she looked like she might crumble. But then, to my surprise, she straightened up, her eyes flashing with defiance. And what about you, Chris? You think you're blameless in all this? You shut me out for years. You made me feel invisible. Invisible? I set my coffee down, my anger bubbling to the surface. I've been here, Laura. Every single day, I've been here. I've supported you, celebrated your successes, and trusted you. And what did I get in return? You sneaking around behind my back and calling me the problem? You don't understand, she said, her voice rising. It wasn't about choosing him over you. It was about feeling something again, feeling like I mattered. Oh, you mattered all right, I shot back. You mattered enough for me to build my whole life around you. But I guess that wasn't enough, was it? She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. You know what, Laura? I don't care anymore. You can keep justifying this to yourself if it helps you sleep at night, but it doesn't change the fact that you broke us. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at the floor. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, oppressive, but I wasn't going to be the one to break it. Finally, she looked up at me, her expression raw. So, that's it? You're just done? After everything we've been through, you're ready to throw it all away? I didn't throw it away, I said coldly. You did. She stared at me, her eyes searching mine for something. Some sign of hope, maybe, but I didn't give her any. After a few moments, she nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Fine, she said quietly. If that's how you feel, then I'll go. But I hope you know this isn't just about me, Chris. It's about us. And maybe one day, you'll realize that. I already have, I replied, my voice steady. And that's why this is over. She walked past me, grabbing her keys from the counter. At the door, she paused and turned back. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice breaking. For everything. I didn't respond. I couldn't. She waited for a moment, and when it became clear I wasn't going to say anything, she turned and walked out. When the door closed behind her, I let out a long breath, the weight of the past few days settling over me like a heavy blanket. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Laura was gone, and while the pain of her betrayal still burned, I knew I'd survive. Because revenge wasn't just about making her pay. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself she tried to take away. And that was a battle I was determined to win. Days passed, and the house felt emptier than it ever had before. Laura had moved out, though she'd taken little with her. A few suitcases, some clothes, and her laptop. She left the furniture, the photos, the carefully chosen decor. All of it was still here, haunting reminders of the life we'd built together. The life she destroyed. Then, one evening, she called. I stared at the phone vibrating on the counter, her name lighting up the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. What do you want, Laura? My voice was clipped, the exhaustion bleeding through. She hesitated, then said, I wanted to check on you. Check on me? I said, laughing bitterly. That's rich. I'm fine, Laura. Thriving. Actually, but thanks for the concern. Chris, don't be like this, she said softly. I didn't call to fight. No? Then why did you call? Because unless you've got a time machine or a miracle, I don't see the point. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, I miss you. I almost dropped the phone. You miss me? I repeated, incredulous. Laura, you've got some nerve. You didn't miss me when you were meeting Mark in hotels. You didn't miss me when you were lying to my face. So forgive me if I don't exactly believe you now. It's the truth, she insisted, her voice breaking. I miss us, Chris. I miss the way things used to be. The way things used to be? I shot back. You mean before you blew it all to hell? Yeah, I miss that too. But guess what? We don't get to go back. Not after what you did. I know I hurt you, she said, her voice pleading. But we can fix this. I can fix this. Just give me a chance. You had plenty of chances, I said coldly. And you chose him. Over and over again. You chose him. It wasn't like that, she said quickly. It wasn't about choosing him. It was about, God, I don't even know anymore. I just know I made a mistake. A mistake? I said, my voice rising. You call months of lying and sneaking around a mistake? Forgetting to pay a bill is a mistake, Laura. This was a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice. I know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Please, Chris. I let out a long breath, my grip on the phone tightening. You want forgiveness? I said, my voice cold. Fine, I forgive you. But that doesn't mean I want you back. That doesn't mean we can undo what's been done. Her silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, she said, I understand. I'm sorry, Chris. I really am. Yeah, I said flatly. So am I. I hung up before she could say anything else, the sound of the disconnect ringing in my ears. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. Part of me wanted to throw it across the room, but instead, I set it down gently on the counter. I'd said what I needed to say, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a small sliver of peace. The next day, I received a text from Mark's wife, Claire. Claire, thank you for telling me the truth. I've left him. If you ever want to talk, let me know. I stared at the message for a while, unsure of how to respond. In the end, I typed back a simple reply. Chris, you deserve better. Take care. It wasn't much, but it felt like the right thing to say. Claire and I were collateral damage in a mess we didn't create, but at least we could walk away knowing we hadn't lost ourselves in the process. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, I started to rebuild. I focused on work, reconnected with old friends, and even started going to the gym again. The anger that had consumed me began to fade, replaced by something quieter, acceptance. Laura texted me a few times, always asking if we could talk. I never responded. I didn't see the point. Whatever we'd had was gone, and I wasn't about to let her drag me back into the chaos she'd created. One evening, as I walked along the beach, the Miami skyline glowing in the distance, I thought about what Dominic had told me when I first hired him. "You sure you want to know the truth?" he'd asked. At the time, I wasn't sure. But now, standing here, the cool ocean breeze on my face, I knew. The truth had set me free. Laura had broken my heart, but she hadn't broken me. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all.